Hi, everyone. I'm Crystal Martinez Acosta, licensed professional counselor in Texas and New Mexico. I'm the host and creator of Through the Eyes of a Therapist podcast. And today we have a very special group of people joining me. They're all fellow therapists, and we're going to be talking about the election results, and the politicalness of therapy. And so I'd like for everyone to introduce themselves so that you can get to know them. We have Jessica, Bianca, Brianna, and Angela. So I will pass everything over to them. Hi, Jessica. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Well as I can be doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm good. Thanks for asking. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I am a licensed mental health clinician, which is kind of what they call us in this region. I am from Rhode Island and I live in Rhode Island, but I work in Massachusetts because I'm like right on that border. So I work for a private practice in Massachusetts. And I guess I see a lifespan of clients. So I see kids, I see adults, couples, kind of a variety. So I see kind of people throughout the lifespan. And my pronouns are she, her.
All right. Thank you so much, Jessica. Oh my gosh. I'm curious about what the weather's like up there because I'm in the desert. So I always want to know what other people's weather is like.
It's very unpredictable. So it's like cold in the morning and then it's warm in the afternoon and then it's cold at night. But some days are like election day was in the 80s. But like today's in the 50s. So you just don't know what you get. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
All over the
quite
place.
a variability for sure. Thanks for telling me and thanks for being here on the podcast. I really
Thank you for
appreciate
having me.
it. Yeah, I'm so happy that you all are here. What about Bianca? Can you tell us a little bit about I know you've been on the podcast before, so she might sound familiar to some of the listeners out there, but if you can tell us about yourself.
Sure. My name is Bianca. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Texas. I opened my own practice about a year ago, Pearl Counseling, and it's going pretty well. And yeah, I think right now my population is primarily adults. I don't have anyone under the age of 18 right now, but I do have a lot of experience working with children. And I think the majority of my clientele right now is female therapists and the LGBTQ plus community. And
All
my
right.
pronouns are she, her.
Yes. Thank you so much for adding that. And thanks for coming back onto the podcast. We appreciate your voice.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. Let's go on to Brianna. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Am I saying it right?
You are, yes. I think you're
Okay.
like the first person to get it right the first time, so thank you.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Welcome,
Well, my
Brianna.
name's Thank you. Thank you for having me. My name's Brianna Whitted. I am an LCSW. My pronouns are she, her. I currently live and I'm from right outside of Asheville, North Carolina. And I actually work for a nonprofit doing clinical consulting for youth aging out of foster care. And then I also have a private practice on the side where I see primarily adults, mainly women who are navigating transitions and anxiety and depression and all of the issues that we face as women. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you so much, Brianna. How interesting. I imagine you're very busy having like your full-time job and then the private practice.
Yes, all the time.
Yeah, thank you for your work. I appreciate you coming onto the podcast as well. And next we have Angela. If you can tell us a little bit about yourself, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Crystal. So, my name is Angela Rodriguez Heller. I'm from I'm from New York, particularly New York City. I'm a licensed mental health counselor with diagnostic privilege in New York. I licensed professional counselor in New Jersey with telehealth registration in Vermont and Florida. I work primarily with neurodivergent individuals, people with anxiety, depression, first generation, intergenerational trauma, and emotional regulation. And my pronouns are she, her.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Wow, all the way from New York. So we have a lot of people from like the East Coast. So yeah, this podcast's goal is to kind of demystify therapy for listeners and also for other budding clinicians and people who are in the mental health field to kind of get a sense of what we go through every day and what we are thinking. And so part of the mission of the podcast is also to humanize therapists, right? Like show people that we're human and that we don't necessarily have it all together. There are strengths and weaknesses and challenges that we all have. And so I know that something that has occurred over the last week since election night and going into the day after when we all found out the results of the election in the United States is this theme of other communities of clinicians kind of coming together on social media from all over the United States and talking about their reactions to the election results, whether their candidate won that they voted for or not, whether they voted or not. And then from all different walks of life, right? Like women identifying people, men, people who are young, people who are old, and all different kinds of people reacting who are therapists. And so I thought that it would be really interesting to talk about this kind of in the heat of the moment so that we are able to address some of the myths that might be going around about therapists who have political opinions or political views, and kind of like what different therapists might be thinking in reaction to the election results. And so one of the first questions that I have is about discussing politics with clients. There's, I think, a lot of misconceptions, or even, I'm not sure if it's a misconception, maybe it is, where we're supposed to just be like blank slates, like tabla rasa kind of people approaching clients with no bias and no, I guess, opinion about what's happening outside of the therapy room. And I think I would like to discuss this question because I want to know what happens with you all when politics are brought up in the therapy room with a client, or if you have any examples on how you handle this situation. So whoever would like to answer first, I'd like to hear what you have to say.
I know for me personally, I don't bring up politics in therapy. I kind of have it very client led, where if they want to talk about politics, then I'm absolutely going to be a neutral and a supportive ear for them. I think since I work primarily with adults and since I started my private practice within the last 2 years, politics has been an increasing topic of conversation with my clients, where a lot of my clients will even say in their referral issues of, hey, I'm feeling anxious about the world and what's happening and things like that. So I personally never bring it up on my own, but if they bring it up, then I definitely welcome that as a topic of conversation.
Yeah, I think I relate to that approach where I don't bring it up. I don't think it's like, hey, I'm Crystal Acosta and this is how I voted, or these are the policies I believe in or something. So yeah, I totally agree. And I think I have heard more recent, I guess it's more recently bringing up the election, like it a little bit more than even the last time, maybe even in 2016, I think. Like I've worked through a couple of elections as a therapist, and I think that this is a lot more common now. But what about you all? Anybody else want to talk about how they discuss politics with clients if it comes up?
Sure, I can
I'll
talk a
go.
little bit about that. Oh, sorry, you can go ahead.
It's okay. You could go.
Okay. I think it's just kind of similar. I don't bring it up like in conversation. Obviously, it's client led, and if the client speaks about it, then I think they can generally get what my views are by the way I'm responding to them, or, if they're saying something that's really going to affect them, and, my empathy is going to strongly be there for their experience. And so most of the time, I think that they can just kind of gather. But when there's somebody who is opposing my political views, then I think I just try to reflect as strongly as possible so that I don't offend them. Because ultimately, my goal is not to change their experience, it's to help them through theirs.
Yeah, go ahead, Angela. What were you going to say?
So Bianca actually said it perfectly. My approach is very similar to actually hers and Brianna's because when I work with clients, I usually client centered therapist, meaning that I allow them to talk about whatever comes to mind. And lately, like with everyone else, it's about politics, and I kind of like know that what that's gonna mean for me and me with helping clients. And because of that, I just let them talk about it a little bit, process it. And because I tend to do my sessions from a social justice perspective. I educate my clients on what it means for them, especially since I tend to work with a lot of minorities, women, LGBT populations. And because of that, I tend to provide that space for them, but also try to like educate them of what it means and how their experiences are valid. Kind of similar to Bianca in the sense like clients assume what my stance is based on my social justice perspective.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jessica. Were you gonna add something?
Yeah, I think with my own clients, I think every one of my clients thinks that I have their political beliefs because I don't talk about my own. If they bring up their political beliefs, of course I'm going to talk with them and about how they're feeling. But a lot of it is perspective taking and validating. So I think through that, they might think that I'm on this similar, and I might not, but I can still see their side and see their perspective and still validate their feelings, whether they're on either side. Like, all right, I see where you're coming from, and kind of validate them through that way. So I think all of my clients maybe think I voted the same way they did, regardless of how they voted.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's important to be able to be um like impartial, because I think neutral is a little bit different, right? Neutral is like you don't have a stance either here or there, but I think impartiality is conveying to another person um that you can kind of hear their side and that you can still be empathetic even if you don't agree with them, because I think the human condition is what we're working with, right? People coming in with grief or trauma or different issues, it's not like, I understand that some of the trauma or the things that they've gone through might have been due to or because of a political issue or some sort of social policy, but it doesn't mean that we have to get into that part of it. I think that sometimes it's appropriate to just like stay away from that unless they bring it up, right? Like, oh, I was directly affected by this one policy or law and now I'm traumatized or now have anxiety. Then it's like, okay, let's sort of talk about that. But otherwise, I can sort of see how if you're taking like a person centered approach and like that perspective taking that you're talking about, it's like it would be hard for them to sort of figure out what side you're on, right? Unless you're explicit about it. So that's interesting. As far as, I guess, building rapport with clients who have differing political views, I think that that's related to this sort of conveying empathy, really trying to understand what life is like from their point of view and in their shoes and saying that back to them, right? It's like, how do you empathize with somebody who maybe doesn't have your political views?
I can add to that. I think that it's harder for sure because it will inevitably create countertransference. And I think one of the biggest things that I've learned during this election, because the first time we were in a very similar election, it was very hard for me because was just starting out. I was fresh out of grad school. I had, just been licensed provisionally. And so it was a very interesting learning experience. But this time around, I feel like I was very aware of my experience and how I was affected by other people's perspectives. And I think very similarly, I just kind of walked into it with a lot of empathy and trying to understand that their political views are not a personal attack on me, you know, and talking to my therapist about the things that were really affecting me versus keeping that holding space for that in a session where I was supposed to be holding space for somebody else. So I just kind of knew my role and still continue to know and understand my role. And I think that that really helped me to just keep it professional and empathetic and, you know, relational.
I was just going to add to, like, I think as therapists, we wear so many hats, and I think advocacy and social justice are two really big hats that we wear. And so I think part of with being a therapist, I think part of it is knowing what hat to wear in what moment. And so, just like Jessica was saying a little while ago, in the moment that I'm with a client, regardless of what their political stance is, it's not my role to change their mind or to convince them of something else. It's my role to be there for them, to help them understand themselves and to work towards their goals. And so, I think that's really important to remember during those relationships of like, what is my role in this moment? And how can I still have those other advocacy roles, but in more appropriate times?
Yeah. So kind of like with everyone else, I tend to build rapport with all my clients regardless of their political views, because it's important to be able to view sessions through a non-judgmental standpoint. However, it doesn't mean that it's error free, because sometimes, like, depending on the nature of the client and what their beliefs are, sometimes it could lead to a slightly chaotic situation. Can I give an example? Okay, great. So
Yes,
yeah,
go
so I
ahead. Yeah.
used to work in a community mental health clinic a few years ago, and I had clients who had different political views than myself, verbally harass the staff at times, sometimes other clients in the waiting room. And because of that, I had intervened and other staff had intervened in order to be able to de escalate the situation. Obviously, I didn't attack they say, oh, you should have done that. More I'm like, what happened? Like, let's talk about it. I understand you were upset, but does that mean that were supposed to behave that way towards other people? Like, let's see if we could try to remedy the situation so that something like that doesn't happen again, and then process it afterwards with my colleagues, with my supervisor, because it's one thing to like have clients who have opposing political views as yourself, but it's another thing if it affects other people and their safety. Luckily, my community mental health clinic had a zero tolerance policy against verbal threats, physical threats, and because of that, they were able to step in as needed.
Yeah, that's a really interesting example because I think sometimes, like you're saying, political views could be private or they're not explicit. But once it starts getting into the territory of let me be condescending or disrespectful or derogatory to other people or threatening physically or emotionally or whatever it is, right? Then that's yeah, interesting. And I think that something that I noticed is your response sounds like you had to be really regulated. Like you can't be like infuriated and defensive in that moment as a therapist or even a staff at this clinic, right? Like you have to be super like in your frontal lobe, right? And not like back here reacting. Like sure, it's an intense moment, but you can't add to the fire or feed into it or let your views get in the way. And then you end up causing harm somehow. You have to be super just um not neutral because it doesn't sound like you were neutral. There's a tolerance policy, right? So that's like not neutral. You're taking a stance against something, but it's just the way that you're coming across is like regulated. Like, okay, I have taken some breaths and now I need to address the situation professionally.
Yeah, because like I understand that stuff like that happens. It's just a matter of trying to figure out, okay, what am I feeling in the moment? What am I thinking in that moment? And what steps do I need to take or to get that situation de-escalated? Because obviously, when you're in a mental health clinic, the responsibility is a little bit on you as a therapist to try to get the client to re-regulate themselves in any particular moment. So luckily, I was able to like take note of what I was feeling, be like, oh boy, oh, not again, not again. Take deep breaths, finish what I was doing, and then talk to the client once I had the time. Because obviously, when you're in a mental health clinic, you have to like balance so many different responsibilities. So I was like, okay, now let me talk with this client to figure out what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And I think everybody is nodding their heads like when other people are talking. And it's interesting because I think we all feel sort of the same way about a lot of this. I think that we all agree that, we don't bring up therapy unless it's brought up. We're not like imposing our views on people like purposefully or outright or explicitly. We all have to maintain like regulation. We have to de-escalate situations. We have to remain level headed. Like, so I think that these are all really good points that we're all making. I want to get into the next question about, I think it's something that I feel has caused controversy and not necessarily among like the therapy community, like us therapists and social workers talking about it. It's more like maybe people who don't understand our profession or who aren't in the profession. and then kind of encountering therapists who, and what I'm talking about is like on social media or with family, like where you kind of make your political opinion known, or you talk about social issues, historical issues in our country that could be affecting clients. And I think the question is therapy political? Like, is there a political spin on some of these therapeutic interventions or even the way that we conceptualize clients? I know my answer, but I'd like to hear from you all and like how you kind of make sense of that link between therapy and politics.
I guess I'll be the guinea pig. I think it's such a loaded question that it's really hard to answer it, because I think that if we look at it through a social justice lens, like, yeah, it is, because a lot of us are voting in advocacy of our clients, you know what I mean? And but at the same time, like, at its core, I don't think it has to be, because as we've established with a lot of the other questions, like, it in the session, it's not necessarily about politics, even if that's the subject. It's about how the clients are feeling about it and kind of experiencing it in a more mindful way, and how it's affecting them, and emotionally, physically, environmentally, just financially, all of those things. So, yes and no. It's just such a loaded question.
Yeah, I can add to that. I think maybe it is yes and no. Like, I think some therapists might say yes and some therapists might say no. I think for me it is, because we have such the privilege and also the responsibility of learning so many stories and how different things have impacted so many people of different groups. And so I think that for me, definitely, like, my work as a therapist impacts my decision making at the polls and in that advocacy work. And so for me, I think it definitely is. And I probably would have answered this differently, like in 2016 and before I started working directly with people. I was in college during that time, so I was learning all the things, but not yet working directly with people. And I think hearing all of those stories and hearing how decisions made in Washington directly impact those that we see on a weekly basis, it's kind of hard not to want to get involved in some way, shape, or form when we see those hurting or being impacted.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point because I've heard so many people this whole entire week just say, well, I did what was right for me and my family. And like me as somebody, I just feel like I can't do that, right? Because it's like, well, I can't just think about myself because there's people like person after person that I sit across from every day and hear their stories and hear their fears and hear their worries. It's like, well, I can't just vote for myself or I can't just think about myself because it's not just about me. It's about all of these people that I encounter every day. So it's, I think for other people, it's really hard to understand. I mean, particularly I'm from a blue state. So I know that the people around me, their rights and freedoms may be more protected than other people's in other parts of the country. But that doesn't mean that I can't worry about them too. Just because my clients might not be directly affected because we come from a more protected state doesn't mean that I'm also not thinking about everybody else across the country as well. So it's almost like you just can't only think about yourself. You don't only go into that poll booth worrying about you and your family. You're worrying about every person that you have met, every story that you have heard, and it's just, yeah, I think it's hard to just think about yourself as like an egocentric person in that moment.
Yeah. So, yeah, initially I wanted to say both yes and no, that therapy is political, because when I think about politics, it's something that we will learn about in grad school, about, especially when it comes to ethics. Like, oh, you should be really talking about politics, especially imposing your own viewpoint on what you believe in, who you believe in, and so on. However, as time went on, it became a little more political, especially post 2016, because I, like, actually for me, I was in grad school during that time, and I was actually doing my internship when Trump was elected the first time around. And because of that, like, I've been hearing a lot of people talk about the elections at that time, especially my supervisor, my co-workers, my classmates. And then it got me thinking, like, over time, how much us therapists don't really talk about politics or think about politics. Obviously, as I advanced in my training, got my professional licenses, and so on, I became more understanding about talking about politics in the therapy room. At the same time, it's hard to not negate our clients' experiences because we're not just saying with a client, we're saying with a mother, a child, a person who student, someone who's part of the union, LGBTQ individual, so a kid, a teen, and so on and so forth. That when it comes time to vote in the elections, we are not only have to think about who we want as our leaders, but rather like who will be a good leader for our clients, because ultimately it'll also impact them at the end. And it kind of has, considering what I've been seeing on social media, what I've been hearing from both clients, members, and friends. So now I'm thinking more that rather than yes and no, therapy is definitely political, especially when you consider the historical element of it, where it used to be white men, white rich men, who was in charge, who was the founders of psychotherapy. And now that's shifted over to women, like whether it be white women or women of color, it's still political because we kind of have to use our interventions based on past teachings, past studies that they don't even work with a lot of our clients. So we have to adapt them to best suit our clients' needs.
Yeah, I think those are all really good points. Something that I'm hearing is that most of what we deal with as therapists is personal for clients, right? So then it's almost like the question should be, do you think that the personal is political, right? Because it's like what we're dealing with is people's personal, deep, dark secrets and lives and how those things intertwine with like a wider system. And I think that if we look at it through that lens, then yes, like the personal is political. And something else that I wanted to kind of point out that Brianna had talked about and Angela is that I also, before I became a therapist, had different political views, which is interesting. I can deconstruct that on a whole separate podcast, right? Because I'm a Latina woman of color. And I live in a community where there's a lot of immigrants and things like that. So it was interesting to me that I would vote differently back then, but now it's different. But because I think I experienced a lot of what you were saying is that once you sit across from people daily for like hundreds of hours a year for me now it's been over like 14 years, you start to develop this sense of empathy, and it's different to vote just based on your own personal interests versus voting for the interests of your clients because you have heard so many things from them, right? And you've witnessed so many different people from so many different walks of life that it's like the variety and the diversity that you are exposed to is just unreal. And I don't think anybody but therapists or maybe even like teachers, like people in human services fields will understand that, right? To the degree that we do. So I think that that's important. It also makes me think of how, yes, like we vote and it's personal and it's like just us going into that booth or up to that little computer thing, excuse me, but it's like it reminds me of how individualistic, America has become or that we are. And so it's like, well, I'm going to vote for the best interest of my wallet or whatever it is, right? If I'm a man, I'm going to vote for my best interest. Or if I'm a rich person, I'm going to vote for my own personal thing, right? But it's like, what about the collective? And I don't understand that. So I think that sometimes depending on the collective is really scary. I think especially for marginalized groups. So these are things that run through my head as you all are talking about this, but I appreciate your opinions on that because I think that other therapists that might be listening to this could be getting a sense of like universality, right? Like other therapists are willing to say publicly that like therapy is political somewhat, and like you're not crazy for thinking that. I think that it's a very valid thought. And so this is now, I think we've dipped our toes in the water and I'd really like to just shove you into the pool by asking you this question. How did you handle election night and the day after, personally slash professionally, whatever you're willing to share? And I'll also share my opinion. And I'll start off with saying that, like, the night of the election, I was teaching a class. I teach counseling students who are in grad school, and we do like internship. I teach internship and practicum in those classes. So our classes are a little bit more of a seminar versus like a lecture. And so we had a really long discussion about like how to handle post-election conversations with clients and what should be done or what should be said or not said. I'm a very person centered trained therapist. And so my view comes from that, right? Like just that perspective taking and empathy and really relying on your core skills, even some like interpersonal processing theory stuff where you're just like kind of throwing it back on the client and like really processing what they're feeling and how their bodies are reacting and what their faces are saying. And I think that those, for me, are kind of like sure bets. And I was trying to teach them that, but they're students, right? So they were freaking the hell out. I have these political views, and what if I have a client who has a different political view? And then, like, it just kind of went on and on, you know. So it was just a whole other experience. And then at the same time, my classes at night, so like the results were like rolling in, right? Like the maps and stuff. And so people during our breaks were like, "Do you see the map? It's like it's all red and it's like these states are blue." And I'm so surprised. And I'm like, I don't know what's happening. I'm teaching class right now. I just want to get through this and then you can go and like watch TV. I stayed up a little bit election night and started scrolling, and I was like, I realize this is not healthy. I need to go to sleep. So I just like turned my phone off and I used a different alarm because like no, I couldn't like handle the suspense. And then I woke up the morning after and I had this like bad feeling and I was like, okay, I don't know. I just don't feel like I don't know. I don't think it was going to go well based on how I voted and then what I think about, you know, voting for the collective and voting for my best client, my interest, best interest of my clients. And I felt like I woke up on a different timeline. It was really weird. I was like, was there like some sort of parallel universe shift or something? Like, what is going on? It was so weird. But anyway, that's how I dealt with it. And then I was like, you know what? I need to like what can I do to control what I can control? And I'm like, well, I have like a platform on a podcast. So like maybe I can get people to talk about their experiences. And that's where I met most of you, right? In the burned out therapist group. There's this group on Facebook that's pretty funny and awesome for therapists out there. They only allow therapists in. So we're able to kind of talk about the things that bother us or the things that are like burning us out, right? So I think that was a really relevant topic. And that's how we're here now. So I'm interested to hear if you want to share a little bit about how you're dealing with things or what your reactions were.
Yeah, sure. Well, just to go refer back to previous question, Crystal, real quick. I wasn't sure if I wasn't made clear, but it's not so much about I had different political views back in 2016. It's more about how I feel about talk about politics in the therapy room, because obviously I was a grad student. I was more timid, but I was still very progressive, liberal, democratic. And because of that, I was like so hesitant about even talking about politics with a lot of my clients once I started working out as a therapist a year and a half later. So I just wanted to clarify that real quick.
Yes,
But
that makes sense.
yeah, but to definitely answer this current question, I was anxious AF on Tuesday. I was actually anxious a few days prior, but Tuesday is like,
Yeah.
okay, this is showdown. Let's see who's gonna win. And really thought that Harry was gonna win, but something inside me told me something was wrong. And throughout the day, I actually had bad stomach aches to the point I kept going to the bathroom, and kind of like what you were doing, kept looking at the results throughout the day. Nothing, nada. I was like, okay. So I did the evening. I was like, let's see again. Nothing. I was like, okay, no more of that. Let me just watch Bones, watch some crap on YouTube mindlessly, and then just go to bed. I went to bed. Then I woke up to a bunch of messages in my group chat. Be like, I can't believe this. What the hell? And it's like, uh-oh, please don't say so. Because I really thought it would have been like 2020, where it would take a few days to get the results. But as I
True.
was reading the chat more and people were responding, I'm like, no, it can't be, right? Harris is definitely going to win, right? Right? They still count the votes. They're like, no, they pretty much called it. So I went on Google, searched it. I was like, oh, not again. It's kind of definitely to 2016 and 2020. I just felt a sense of, I guess, relief knowing that the worst has happened, but I also felt a sort of way. Like I was, of course, I was sad, but it was different. Like I guess I felt more angry, more disbelief, kind of numb. I mean, I did cry a little bit, like later on the day and the next day, but more so about what this means, not only for myself, my family, my friends, but also my clients, because obviously everyone was talking about politics, like the election. So I was like, okay. And then when a lot of my clients start talking about the election results, be like, yeah, I like using humor with my clients. Like, join the club, join the club. Be like, talk because because a lot of my, myself and a lot of my clients are feeling like the downsides, like of the results. Like, obviously, I had to say, oh, vote for Harris or whoever, but more so like, I feel you. Let's talk about it though, because it's not about me. It's about you, the client, sitting right in front of me, and then just process it, normalize what they're going through, things they could definitely do, reinforce those coping skills, and also just educate them, and also encouraging like taking any kind of collective action at the end of the day. Because one thing I noticed with a lot of my clients is they want to get more involved in politics. Like they obviously they didn't like the two candidates regardless. Like one of the two best choices according to them. But I was like, okay, so you know that. So what you want? Like what do you think you could do? Like you could definitely run in local office if you want to. Maybe join protests. You could definitely donate. Like let's talk about it. Because obviously you think about something, otherwise you won't be mentioning it. So let's explore that to see what can be done, if anything.
Yeah, similar to your guys's explaining, I feel like Tuesday all day I was very anxious, just not knowing, like just kind of being in that realm of the unknown. And then I went to bed early Tuesday. I am a grandma and I was not staying up till like 2 a.m. to watch the results. But I just kind of like jolted awake Wednesday morning around like 5 a.m. and just had like this pit in my stomach. And so I really tried not to watch the results or to like even look at my phone, but then I was not going back to sleep. So I was like, I might as well just open it. And then from there, I think all day Wednesday was just very anxiety filled. I ended up going to the gym before work that day. I am not a morning person. I'm not a go to the gym in the morning person. I usually go in the evenings, but I just needed something to kind of like channel that physical anxiety into. And so I felt like that was really helpful. But I think overall this week, it's just been a really heavy feeling of not only feeling anxious for myself as a female, but also all of the clients that I work with who are LGBTQ, and who I work with some clients who are immigrants, and just the population that I work with, and knowing, like we were talking about earlier, knowing their stories and knowing how this might impact them. It just felt really heavy. Like I think in that moment, it was a responsibility of not being scared for myself only, but also others. And so that was really challenging. And I know Jessica was mentioning like you live in a blue state. I live in a swing state of North Carolina. I live in an area where most of our area does not vote the way that I do. And so I think also this week it's just been really easy to feel disconnected and kind of feeling like I was on an island processing this on my own. And so I think for me, it's been really helpful to intentionally seek out other people who are feeling the same way as I am, and especially connecting with other therapists, just like all of you guys, to kind of process and have connection. And I just keep trying to remind myself that there was almost half of us that that voted the same way and that had the same goals and were thinking of that collective good. And so when I have those tendencies to feel on my own, like just reminding myself that there is community, and I think that's one of the most important things that we can rely on right now.
Yeah, really similar experiences to you guys. I did not stay up and watch the election. I'm on the East Coast, so we don't get results till like 3, 4 in the morning. So I was like, and I honestly, kind of like what Angela said, I honestly thought it was going to be like 2020 where we weren't going to get results for like days. Cause I think it was Saturday after the election in 2020 that we found out that Biden won. So I was like, there's no way that we're going to find out tonight. I'm going to sleep because, I have to be a functioning human being tomorrow. So I honestly woke up Wednesday and I didn't think we were going to know. I thought I was going to be watching results all day. So when I opened my phone, it just like popped up immediately. And I was like, okay, great. And I think I had like a session like an hour later. And I log on and you can just see the client's face, like they're angry. And I was like, well, this mentally prepare yourself because this is what the day that you're going to have. It was a gorgeous day here in New England, which honestly doesn't make me feel any good because it's like, well, that's climate change for you. Like it really shouldn't be 80 degrees in November in Rhode Island. So I was like, it feels good in the moment because I got to go outside and take a walk and get fresh air. But then as I was walking, I was like, this really, you should be wearing a jacket right now, but you're not. And that's a whole nother thing that comes with these results. But it just felt like all day I didn't know who was going to come into my office and how they were going to feel because I work in a very like affluent area. It's very affluent, very white. And so I didn't know. A lot of times I don't know how my clients even vote because, like I said, a lot of them come from, well, I'm just going to vote for what's good for me and my family. They don't necessarily, I think, have to see the bigger picture or are forced to see the bigger picture because of where they're from. So I was like, I don't really know what's going to walk through my office, but pretty consistently, it was just anger in every single session. It was just either anger or it was sadness or it was confusion. And so it was just navigating through that all day was tough, but yeah, I wasn't expecting it when I woke up Wednesday. And so just having to like talk myself through it of like, okay, like here you go. Like this is the times you got to show up and you got to be there and you got to be present. You got to be ready for whatever walks through the door because there's going to be a lot of emotions. So it was tough, but we managed. And I think kind of like Brianna said, like finding like-minded people and talking to other therapists and reaching out to some of the friend therapists that I have who are part of the LGBTQ community or are minorities. I kind of reached out to them. I was like, hey, like, or how are you doing? Are you okay? And I think having that camaraderie and having those times where we could just check in on each other was really helpful.
I think to add to that, to what you both are saying, Brianna and Jessica, and even Angela as well, that it's hard for me not to feel hopeful in general because, here you guys are from New York and North Carolina and Rhode Island and all these other places of the country that are, voting just the same way I do, even though I live in a very red state that doesn't vote the way I do. It's very hard to not feel hopeful. And I work with so many young people who are just enraged. And I would say a good majority of my clients were as enraged as I was. And so that helps. It really does help to feel like, well, maybe in a decade things will be different and women will have rights again. Who knows? But it's hard. It's really hard. And to answer the question, election night was hard for me because I don't know if it was the election or food poisoning or bad reaction to medication or something, but I was like really sick that night and I couldn't
Oh
work
gosh.
for 3 days. I was just like, my body, it took it out of me. My body was just done and over it. And I don't think I didn't go back to work until yesterday. So that was very, very interesting for me. It was the first time, but it was a really long October was really long. So it could have been just a lot of things catching up with me, the stress of the election, all of that stuff. Who knows? But I was like looking at my phone all night long because I couldn't sleep because I felt so physically ill. So yeah, that was interesting. But the next morning, I just took that rest and listened to my body and didn't watch the news. I knew the results, but I just kind of took that time for myself and did what I needed to do for me to just recuperate and recover physically, because I don't know, like I said, if it was food poisoning or or what, but I was sick that whole night. So it was interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I think like the um somatic reactions that people can have is something that we shouldn't dismiss either. Like just because it maybe we didn't process it cognitively or we didn't process it verbally, we can definitely feel stuff in our bodies. And maybe if you're out there listening to this and being like, oh, yeah, I was sick that day, or oh yeah, I had migraines that like now that you're saying that, my neck on my left side has been like, like where you can't turn all the way? Like it's been hurting since Tuesday. And I'm like, well, what the hell did I do different? Like, I didn't change my pillow or like, I don't know. But now that I think about it, I'm like, maybe it's like stress, like from that, like just kind of my body processing some of that. But some of the
The
things that
body
I'm
keeps the
hearing,
score.
yeah, it definitely does. And this can be the election results can be traumatizing or re-traumatizing or triggering to clients or to just anybody, even if you haven't been in therapy, right? Like these things are very real, and any reaction that you're having is valid, I think. And what I'm hearing is that in your experiences with your clients, you've talked to them about like their reactions, you're processing that, but you're holding space for them, but you're holding space for yourself at the same time, because this is like a collective experience, right? It kind of reminds me of when we went through the pandemic and nobody knew what the hell was going on. Like, can you go outside and touch handlebars? Like, what is happening, right? Like, you can't, it was so unpredictable and scary, and like a bunch of people were unaliving and all kinds of stuff, right? And so it was scary for everyone at the same time. And then clients coming in to process that fear, but we're also scared. So I think that that is super normal for therapists, especially when a collective event like this or like a milestone situation is happening. And then I'm also hearing how, like most of us were like shocked about the results, kind of like, wait a minute, like what? Like, I don't know, like it's a little suspicious. I'm laughing because if I don't laugh, I'll cry. But like, it's just like suspicious. But also talking about how you have different clients with different views, right? And it's like I don't know how they're gonna react or how I'm gonna react. So it's kind of like looking at it through that lens of like, well, if they voted in their own best interest or the best interest of their individual families and that individualism, it could be because of privilege, right? Like experiencing that level of I don't have to think about these things like care for my body as a woman or LGBTQ plus rights or marginalized populations because I'm not those things. And so I don't have to think about that, right? So that's like a place of privilege. It's very interesting. And then I also remembered how one of my old male colleagues reached out to me. He called me the day after the election. And it's weird because we talk to each other once every couple months or something. It's not very um often, but he called me and he's like, "Hey, Crystal, I just want to check on how you're doing and how some of your friends are doing from the old place that we all used to work at." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm so grateful that you're calling and talking to me. Like, it's really nice that he checked on me, like I think because he's a therapist, like he understands these kinds of dynamics and ways that it can affect us. But I just thought it was really nice. So you all talking about how like you're reaching out to your own communities or them reaching out to you, like that's a really good comfort. My last question to everybody is what themes you're seeing now. I know it's been less than a week, right? And by the time this podcast comes out, it'll be like 5 days since we've heard about who won. But have you noticed anything with clients, like patterns or themes that are coming up? I know some of you have talked about how your clients are reacting, like with anger, sadness, but any general themes that you're noticing in your sessions?
Yeah, absolutely. Increased depression and increased anxiety. That's pretty much, especially the people who voted similarly, or voted for Harris. They're terrified.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, same as what Bianca was saying. Definitely a lot of or an increased amount of depression and anxiety, and then I think also just anger and maybe some confusion too. I think for a lot of what my clients were saying was it kind of felt like Almost like one of my clients actually did call it a reality check of like she was just saying she's in college right now, and she was just expressing that it she's realizing that she lives in like an echo chamber where she was like, I thought that everybody was going to vote the same way that I did, and I thought that everybody just cared for other people and had empathy, and so it was almost like a reality check that that wasn't what happened. And so I think that's one thing that I'm seeing with my population.
Yeah, no, I think very similar to you, Brianna. A lot of my clients kind of think of it as a reality check. And I think not only living in a blue state, but having nothing but blue states surrounding you. Massachusetts is like an island of blue states, right? I think gave a lot of my clients, especially my younger ones who maybe are voting for the first or second time, a very false sense of security that people think the way that they do, that they vote the way that they do, and that maybe it would be somewhat close, but it wouldn't be nearly the kind of results that it was. And so I think it was a lot of anger and it was a lot of confusion. And I think, like I said before, I think maybe things are a little different for the populations that I work with because we're from Massachusetts. So I think there is a little bit of a safety blanket. So there's not as much anxiety. I think if maybe I was working in a red state, I think maybe the anxiety and the depression might be up a little bit more. I think a lot of it is anger, and I think a lot of it is confusion of like, wait a minute, this is not the way that the rest of the country is. And I think for a lot of people who, like I said, were voting for the first or second time, my young adults, I think they were very confused and therefore very angry.
Yeah, same here. Same exact. I'm not going to basically repeat all that, but I was like, yeah, same with a lot of my clients. But one thing I have been noticing with some of my clients is just processing, like just the nature of the country, like how they voted, why they're not surprised people voted the way they did. And also just the idea that yes, we'll be stuck with Trump for the next 4 years. But some of them have a feeling that it's only temporary, like with him being in office, meaning that it's only 4 years. It might be less, considering what they're saying in the news about his health, his well being, and possibly like what could happen politically with him. Like I know here in New York, Letitia, I think it's Letitia James. So I know I'm a New Yorker. I don't even know the Attorney General, but her and Governor Kathy Hochul, they're actually going to be continuing to pursue the lawsuits against him because of everything that he done to to people to I think the his students at the time. I'm trying to remember. It's been so long since I heard about it. But saying we're coming after you, one way or another. We'll give you your little victory for now, but we definitely will come after you. But it's mostly like a lot of like processing, reacting, and just think about it in a different way. Like we are stuck with him. People have made the decision, and that's okay too. But it's only going to be for a few years. But at the same time, they're also acknowledging other people in the country about what they're going to do, especially those who haven't voted for him. Because a lot of people, they voted for him in the red states. A lot of people didn't. And they're facing the consequences of other people's actions. So it's a lot of empathy as well in the mix.
Yeah. I think that there's kind of like this fine line, right, of like trying to comfort clients, console clients, um, using sort of not like CBT like to gaslight them, but using some of the strengths based parts of the situation. Like, yes, it could be temporary. We still don't know what's going to happen. There's a checks and balances system in the government, and hopefully that will still be carried out the way it's supposed to. And it's not like we're suddenly going to have a dictatorship. But I think sometimes, depending on the client, that we need to use that skillfully, right? I'm not saying you, Angela. I'm just saying in general, because this is a theme that also came up in my class where it's like, well, do we really have to worry that much? And it's like, oh, wait a minute. Like, you don't want to say that to your clients if they're coming from maybe like a marginalized group of people or like who are SA survivors or, there are plans in place that this party who's going to be in control in 2025 have written down and published. And there's like rhetoric and stuff out there that is very threatening, right? And it can cause trauma responses. So I think it's like this fine line of like, I want to comfort you and let you know that you're resilient and we're all going to be okay and we're going to like fight, right? But at the same time, it's like, ooh, like we got to be like skillful and strategic about some of the things we say. It just really depends on the person, right? And so that's what your comments were making me think of. But I don't know if anybody has anything else they want to add before we go. That was the last question. Did you want to
I
say something? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I
Sorry.
just had one thought. I don't even remember what question it was that we were talking about this, but something that I've been sharing with my clients a lot. So, for anyone who's been watching the news, like I live right outside of Asheville, North Carolina, and so we just experienced a significant hurricane and flooding. And so,
Yeah.
I think for me, it's been very surreal to come from being so connected with my community and being so like just seeing so many acts of kindness to then going to the election. And so one thing that I've been reminding my clients is that in the moments of those disasters, like we were all helping each other. Like nobody was asking, like, oh, who are you voting for? Or how do you feel about this? Like we were just showing up for each other and showing each other acts of kindness. And so I think that humanness will always win and like kindness will always win. And so I'm trying to also just ground me and my clients in that to show up for each other and to show kindness and to advocate for each other. And maybe stay off social media and the news media and other devising. I don't think that's the right word, but like the others trying to divide us, essentially. So yeah, I don't remember when that came up, but I did want to share that.
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Kind of like going back to what you were just saying about using CBT and reframing, Crystal, because yeah, it's very interesting that a lot of clients are kind of doing it by themselves. Like as I'm just saying, they're listening to them, especially when it comes to like him being only temporary, while also just educating them about the checks and balances of this country. It's just hard. Like yeah, with we as therapists, we have to be there for our clients and use necessary interventions, but also try to know, okay, how do we balance that appropriately, especially when it's coming from the clients themselves? Because it's very interesting that there's a shift, especially after 8 years that he was initially elected as president.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. When people are saying those things for themselves, and that could be viewed as a strength, right? And then in other ways, it just depends on the context in which they're using it, right? Like, is it like denial? Like, I don't know, like, I guess that's how I'm interpreting it.
Right.
But yeah, is that what you kind of mean? Like,
It's not like, I don't want to say denial in the sense, but more so like thinking about it in a different light, saying that yes, this is a bad situation, bad things will happen, but everyone able to survive 4 years with him the first time, pretty much. Like I'm saying like hopefully, but I can't speak on my behalf of my clients, but we could probably survive another 4 years with him. He would probably,
got it.
because we don't know honestly. Like, and that's something I've been noticing, saying to all my clients. Like, yes, he's elected. There's Project 2025. Everything you're saying is valid, but we just don't know. Like, as much as I love CBT, as much as I love psychodynamic, DBT, we just honestly we don't know. Like, and I actually find it to be humbling, like being a therapist in these moments, because even though I think about things logically, like based on patterns, I can't say for
Yeah.
sure. I don't want to put tell my clients, oh yeah, this is gonna happen, that is gonna happen, and so on and so forth. Be like, it could, there's a chance, but we just don't know.
Yeah.
Temporary, yeah, most likely yes, 4 years. We just don't know how long.
Yes, I totally get what you're saying now. And I think I really never thought about it as a humbling experience, but that is so true. I think that resonates with me a lot because sometimes it's like you're in these situations, you're like, I don't know what the hell to do or what to say, or like I have all these skills and all these other things. And yeah, I can be whatever technique or like even be as human as possible, right? And empathize. But because of that uncertainty, it's like, yes, where we're at. right now. And I think that that's a really cool way to look at it, actually. So I appreciate your perspective. One of the metaphors, or I don't know if it's analogy, I never use that term right. Anyway, it's I was trying to teach my class about like what our role is, right? And I think that sometimes when we're confused about how we should react or what we should say, one thing that can really ground a therapist is identifying what your role is in the situation, right? And like that's typically looking after the mental health of the person, no matter who they are, advocating for them, no matter who they are, like everything in our ethical code, right? And the metaphor analogy that I used was kind of like being on a sinking boat, right? Like we're all on this boat together. Um, I'm laughing at myself because I'm ridiculous, but like, the violin players on the Titanic, and we're like, that's us, right? Like, we have to not entertain people, but like maintain this sense of hope. Because then what are we doing in this profession if we believe that people aren't resilient or they can't change? Right. So I completely agree with what you're saying. And I think that for us to have that hope, we have to be regulated. We have to take care of ourselves. And what I mean by taking care of ourselves is not that individualistic weird thing. I mean, I'm talking about like the self care, the maintenance of the body and the mind, right? That we are prepared to offer that regulation to others. So I just want to really, really thank all of you for getting together in such a short amount of time and for being so willing and vulnerable to be on this podcast episode, because it's not for everybody, right? Like to be speaking publicly about either your opinions or how you handle things in therapy. But I think it'll be so educational and enlightening for a lot of different people who listen to the podcast. And I really, really appreciate your effort and your energy and vulnerability. And I'm hoping that you, in some way, walk away with some sense of solidarity or healing, even from just this experience. And I just want to thank you. I will definitely link all of these wonderful therapists below so that if you're interested in booking with them or reaching out to them for questions, you can do that. And so, once again, thank you so much to Jessica and Bianca and Brianna and Angela for your time. And I'll see you next time. If you enjoy Through the Eyes of a Therapist, please contribute to my Patreon at Therapist Crystal or Through the Eyes of a Therapist. Remember to get in touch with me at Through the Eyes of a Therapist on Instagram. Please go to the YouTube channel at Through the Eyes of a Therapist, where you can find all the podcast episodes and reaction videos. I'm Crystal Martinez Acosta, licensed professional counselor, and I'll catch you on the podcast next time. Thank you for listening to Through the Eyes of a Therapist podcast.